In today's lecture, we will discuss 6 types of claims. Each claim has its own characteristic patterns of development and support. All arguments use one or more of these types of claims as basic building blocks. Understanding the type of claim helps focus on the argument and generate ideas for it. The first type of claim we will discuss is simple categorical argument. In this type of claim, you try to show if X is a Y, where you and your audience agree on the meaning of Y. A categorical claim can be said to be simple if there is no disagreement about the definition of the category into which a person, event, or phenomenon is placed. The strategy for conducting a simple categorical argument is to provide examples and evidence to show that X does or does not belong to category Y. For example, is surfing the internet a new kind of addiction? Here, provided that the writer and the audience agree upon the meaning of the Y term addiction, all the writer has to do is explain whether or not surfing the internet is an addiction. Often, simple categorical claims look like facts, but they really are not. It is important to distinguish between a fact and a simple categorical claim. A fact is a statement that can be verified in some way, either by empirical observation or by reference to a reliable source trusted by you and your audience. An example of a fact is water freezes at 32 degrees. Simple categorical claim, on the other hand, is a contestable interpretation of facts. Often it is difficult to draw the line between a fact and a claim. The acceptance or skepticism of a given audience can determine what passes as a fact or what becomes a claim that arguer needs to support. The basic strategy of supporting a simple categorical claim is to give examples or to add evidence showing how X belongs in category Y. If you wish to challenge or question someone else's simple categorical claim, you have 3 options. Deny the accuracy of truth of the examples and data. Provide counterexamples that place X in a different category. Raise definitional questions about the Y term. For example, what one may call bossy might seem decisiveness to someone else. In a section where the Y term is contested, the claim is no longer a simple categorical claim. We now have a definitional claim. For a definitional argument, just like a simple categorical argument, you try to show if X is a Y, but in this case, the definition of Y is contested. This means you and your audience disagree about the meaning of the Y term. Hence, you have to define the Y term and defend your definition against objections and alternative definitions. For example, using animals for medical research constitutes cruelty to animals. Here, you would have to define what you mean by cruelty to animals and show how using animals for medical research fits your definition. Definitional arguments usually have a 2-part structure. A definition part that tries to establish the meaning of the Y term, and the match part that argues whether a given X meets that definition. There are 2 types of definition: Aristotelian definition and operational definition. Aristotelian definition is generally used in dictionaries. It defines a term by placing it within the next large class or category and then showing the specific attributes that distinguish the term from other terms within the same category. For example, a socially responsible company is a company here the term is being placed in the next large class, that meets 3 criteria. Now the specific attributes that distinguish the term from other terms within the same category are listed. It doesn't pollute the environment. It creates goods or services that promote the well-being of the community, and it treats its workers justly. Operational definition is a definition that can be measured by means of observation or experience rather than theory. Consider, for example, an argument involving the concept of aggression. Do violent television programs increase the incidence of aggression in children? To do research on this issue, a scientist needs a precise, measurable definition of aggression. Typically, a scientist might measure aggression by counting the number of blows and kicks a child gives to an inflatable Bozo doll over a 15-minute period when other play options are available. The scientist might then define aggressive behavior as 6 or more blows to the Bozo doll. Definition arguments require a criteria-match structure in which the arguer must first define the category term by specifying the criteria that must be met for something to be placed in that category. The writer then shows that the disputed person, event, or phenomenon matches those criteria. The third type of claim is causal argument. In a causal argument, you discuss, does X cause Y? Is Y a consequence of X? This type of an argument entails cause and effect reasoning. Often such arguments arise from disagreement about the cause of an event or a trend. For example, what caused the stock market crash in 2002? Or, what causes teenage males to become violent? Just as frequently, arguments arise from speculation about the possible consequences of an action. For example, what will be the consequences of banning abortion? Or, will gun control legislation reduce violence in the schools? The strategy of conducting cause and consequences argument is to describe the chain of events that lead from X to Y. If a causal chain cannot be directly established, you can argue indirectly using inductive methods or analogies. There are 3 ways to argue that one event caused the other. First method is explain the causal mechanism directly. Identify every link in the causal chain, showing how X causes A, which causes B, which in turn causes C, which finally causes Y. The second method is to use inductive method to establish a high probability of a causal link. If we couldn't explain a causal link directly, we often employ a reasoning strategy called induction. Through induction, we infer a general conclusion based on a limited number of specific cases. For example, if on several occasions you got a headache after drinking red wine but not after drinking white wine, you would be likely to conclude inductively that red wine causes you to get headaches. Inductive reasoning gives only probable truths, not certain ones. The third method is to argue by analogy. When you argue through resemblance, you try to find a case that is similar to the one you are arguing about but is better known and less controversial to the readers. If the reader agrees with your view of causality in the similar case, you try to transfer this understanding to the case at hand. Fourth type of claim is a resemblance argument, also known as argument by analogy. In this type of argument, the writer tries to show that X is like Y. The general strategy for resemblance argument is to compare the first term to the second, pointing out similarities between them if your goal is to make X like Y, or differences between them if your goal is to make X unlike Y. Resemblance uses analogies and comparisons to persuade its audience. For example, a negative analogy. Cramming for an exam is like pumping iron 10 hours straight to prepare for a weightlifting contest. Exhausting and counterproductive. A positive analogy. Cramming for an exam is like carbohydrate loading before a big race. It gives brain a full supply of facts and concepts, all fresh in your mind. There are two ways to construct a resemblance argument. Number one, by using analogies. For example, if you don't like your new boss, you can say she's like a Marine drill sergeant, the cowardly captain of a sinking ship, or a mother hen. Each of these analogies suggests a different management style, clarifying the nature of your dislike while conveying an emotional charge. On the other hand, precedent arguments make comparisons. A precedent argument tries to show that a current situation is like a past situation and that therefore a similar action or decision should be taken or reached. For example, food processing industry is trying to avoid government regulations by employing the same dirty tricks used earlier by big tobacco. Here the author is comparing a current event to a past experience. Fifth type of claim is evaluation and ethical arguments. In this kind of a claim, the author argues if X is good or bad, or if X is a good or bad Y. For example, is a sport utility vehicle a good urban vehicle? The general strategy for evaluation arguments uses criteria match arguing similar to that used by definitional arguments. You first establish your criteria for good and then show how your first term does or does not meet that criteria. Steps to developing your criteria. Place the thing you are evaluating in the smallest relevant category so that you don't compare apples to oranges. Develop criteria for your evaluation based on the purpose or function of this category. Determine the relative weight of your criteria. Ethical arguments deal with ethical and moral issues. For example, is it morally justifiable to spank children? Is it ethical to use human stem cells for medical research? The sixth and final type is proposal arguments. In proposal argument, the writer discusses, should we do X? Argument types 1 through 5 all involve changing your audience's belief about something. Proposal arguments call for action. Proposals ask audience to do something or to act in some way. Typically, proposals use words like should, ought, or must, followed by action of some kind. For example, should gay marriage be legalized? Should the U.S. provide universal health care for its citizens? The most typical strategy for making proposal arguments is to follow a problem-solution justification structure, whereby the opening section convinces the audience that a problem exists. The second section proposes a solution to solve the problem, and the last section justifies the solution by demonstrating that the benefits of acting upon the proposal outweigh the costs or the inherent rightness of the solution. Arguments type 1 through 4 are often called reality or truth arguments. In such arguments, people question the way things are, were, or will be. They are disagreeing about the nature of reality. In contrast, arguments type 5 through 6 deal with values, what people consider important, good, or worth doing. When constructing an argumentative paper, you will find yourself using one or more of these types in your work. It is okay and encouraged that you use multiple different types to develop your claim.